Hollywood has always been made out to be the pinnacle of the American dream. If you make it to Hollywood, you've made it. But there's always been a darker side to all the glitz and the glam. And today we're taking a look at some of Hollywood's creepiest unsolved cases. And we're going to start off the list with the Wonderland Case, which is a pretty wild story. So back in 1981 on Wonderland Avenue, a small-time group of thugs called the Wonderland Crew made their base in a rented townhouse. On July 1st, a series of violent deaths occurred. Now, just a couple days before this, the crew had pulled off a heist at the home of a big shot named Eddie Nash. This Nash guy suspected that a famous adult film star, John Holmes, was in cahoots with the Wonderland Crew during the robbery. So Nash's muscle, a guy named Gregory Dials, grabbed Holmes for questioning. Now, fast forward a couple days later, in the wee hours of July 1st, a bunch of unidentified assailants barged into the Wonderland townhouse and unleashed a brutal series of attacks. They used hammers and metal pipes, leading to the deaths of Ron Linus, Billy DeVerl, Joy Miller, and Barbara Richardson. When the dust settled, the aftermath was pretty grim. Susan Linus, Ron's wife, was the lone survivor, but she suffered major injuries, including losing part of a finger. She also suffered permanent brain damage. Now, strangely, despite screams ringing out in the early hours, the neighbors only dialed 911 around 4 p.m. that day. So why the delay? Well, the Wonderland house was notorious for having wild parties and constant chaos, so this was kind of a boy who cried wolf situation. In the aftermath, the case remained unsolved, with Eddie Nash, his henchmen, and John Holmes getting tangled up in legal drama, but ultimately walking away scot-free. Next up, I have, I think, the only case on this list that isn't a death: the disappearance of Hollywood actress Jean Spangler. She has been missing for 75 years though, so she's still probably dead, and has likely been out of the picture for decades, but who knows? She could be 101 years old, living her best life in rural Bangladesh, but somehow I doubt it. On October 7th of 1949, Jean Spangler left her home around 5 p.m. with plans to meet her ex-husband, Dexter Benner, to discuss late child support payments. She mentioned to her daughter and sister-in-law Sophie that she'd been working on a night shoot for a film after the meeting. And a phone call 2 hours later, she told Sophie that she probably wouldn't be back that evening, expecting to work the full 8 hours on the film set. The next morning, October 8th, when Spangler hadn't returned, Sophie reported her missing to the police. Investigations with studios and the Screen Extras Guild revealed that there had been no records of Spangler having worked that night. The last confirmed sighting of Spangler was around 6 p.m. at the farmer's market near her home, where she appeared to be waiting for someone, according to a saleswoman. Sophie told police that Spangler had gone to meet Benner about a child support, but Benner said he hadn't seen her for weeks. Her purse was also found in Griffith Park, containing a note that read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer, going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while mother is away." Who was this Kirk guy? What did the note mean? And what the hell happened to her? You read the title of the video. It's never been solved. Next up, we have the mysterious death of Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones. So on the night of July 2nd into the 3rd, 1969, Brian Jones was found lifeless at the bottom of his swimming pool at Cotchford Farm. His girlfriend insisted he was still alive when pulled out, but he was declared dead upon arrival at the hospital. Now, the official report labeled it as an accidental drowning. He did have troubles with substance abuse, but there's always been this lingering conspiracy that Jones's death may not have been accidental. Even Jones's own children, John and Barbara, think someone killed their father. The main theory is that a man named Frank Thorogood, a builder working on Jones's property, was involved. In 1993, it was reported that Thorogood even confessed to taking Jones's life in a fight over some money, but the claim still somehow didn't get much attention outside of the conspiratorial kind of realm. In 2009, though, the Sussex police revisited the case, but apparently they didn't find anything new and stood by the original verdict of death by misadventure. Next, we have the case of Johnny Stompanato. On the evening of April 4th, 1958, a tense argument broke out at actress Lana Turner's home in Beverly Hills. It was between Turner and her boyfriend Johnny Stompanato. Stompanato started issuing threats, apparently to Turner, her daughter Cheryl Crane, Crane and Turner's mother. Turner told Stompanato to leave. Now, fearing for her mother's safety, Cheryl Crane, who'd been watching television in another room, grabbed a kitchen knife. Stompanato, still threatening and approaching aggressively, walked into the knife Crane was holding. Yes, she walked into it. At first, Turner just thought her daughter had punched him. By the time ambulances arrived, he was dead. The knife had penetrated his liver, portal vein, and aorta. Cheryl Crane turned herself into the police, but she was exonerated as it was deemed to have been in self-defense. It all seems pretty cut and dry, but Turner would end up facing some criticism. Press outlets questioned her testimony, and a wrongful death lawsuit was filed by Stampanato's ex-wife seeking damages against Crane, her father Steve Crane, and Turner. There's even a theory that Turner herself was the one who stabbed Stompanato, and Crane took the blame to protect her mother, but Crane has always denied that. Next up, we have the case of William Desmond Taylor. Now, it is so incredibly, undeniably obvious that someone killed this man, but at first, people were led to believe that that wasn't the case. William Desmond Taylor was a Hollywood actor and director in the 1910s and early 20s, so that's probably why you've never heard his name. On February 2nd, 1922, he was found dead in his bungalow in Westlake, Los Angeles. A crowd started to gather outside, and a mysterious man called out from the crowd claiming to be a doctor. He came running up from the crowd and quickly examined Taylor's body. Examined, and very heavy air quotes. And then he just claimed that Taylor had died of a stomach hemorrhage. Then everyone, I guess, went back home. And this would have all made sense if it weren't for the very obvious bullet hole in the guy's back. The public became very fascinated with this case because this was really the first time something like this had happened involving people everyone knew from movies. I mean, movies were a very new thing at this point. Hollywood was a new thing. Now, there were tons of suspects and people who were questioned and interviewed. Most of them were actors or involved in Hollywood in some way, but the case was never solved. Next, we have the case of Brandon Lee. Now, I know this gets talked about a lot, and I could go on and on about this one. The Crow, one of my favorite movies, and his father, Bruce Lee, one of my favorite action stars. For the few who aren't familiar, though, Brandon Lee died on the set of what was about to be his big breakthrough film, The Crow. A prop gun, which was supposed to contain blanks, discharged a bullet that struck Brandon Lee in the abdomen. It was a tragic accident. At least that's what it was ruled as, but there have always been skeptics. You see, it's very strange that Brandon Lee would die on the set of his big breakout role when his father, Bruce Lee, also died just after having completed his first big Hollywood movie, Enter the Dragon. There are lots of conspiracy theories surrounding both of these deaths, probably the biggest one being that Bruce Lee ticked off the Chinese mafia after moving out to Hollywood to expand his career, and they decided to make an example of him, and later did away with his son too. Again, not confirmed, just a theory, and of course, it's also incredibly eerie that Brandon Lee died while making a movie where his character is shot, dies, and then comes back as a vengeful spirit. Next on the list, we have the death of George Reeves. So on June 16th, 1959, George Reeves, who was the first guy to play Superman in live-action form, died in his home at 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive. The LAPD reported a gunshot wound to the head between 1:30 and 2 a.m. At the time of the incident, Reeves and his fiancée, Lenore Lemon, had some guests over. Lemon claimed to be in the living room when the shot was fired, but some other guests said she'd been upstairs with Reeves when the shot rang out. Fred Crane, who was a friend of Reeves, stated that Lemon came downstairs after the shot saying, "Tell them I was down here, tell them I was down here." Definitely doesn't look good for her. Oddly, no fingerprints were found on the gun either, and there was no gunpowder residue on Reeves's hands. The fatal bullet was recovered from the bedroom ceiling, and 2 more were embedded in the floor. So even though everyone claimed to have only heard 1 shot, all the bullets were traced back to the firearm near Reeves's body. There were no signs of forced entry or evidence of another person in the room, so it was ruled that Reeves had taken his own life. Now, he had been going through some career troubles and depression at the time, but there's always been some uncertainty as to what really went on that night. Next, we have more death. Thelma Todd. On the morning of December 16th, 1935, the body of actress Thelma Todd was found in her car, which was parked inside a garage at the home of Jewel Carmen, the wife of filmmaker Roland West. Todd was dressed in an elegant silver gown, wearing expensive jewelry. She died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Todd had an active weekend. She'd gone to a party hosted by entertainer Stanley Lupino. She had a brief argument with her ex-husband, but according to friends who'd seen her that night, she hadn't shown any signs of being in any extreme mental distress. The LAPD investigated and concluded Todd's death was accidental. There were no signs of violence on her body. The Homicide Bureau closed the case, deeming that she'd likely taken her own life, even though there was no clear motive and she hadn't left a note. Next on the list is the death of Natalie Wood. On November 29th, 1981, actress Natalie Wood died under incredibly mysterious circumstances. She'd been on a weekend boat trip to Santa Catalina Island on her husband Robert Wagner's yacht. Christopher Walken was also there, oddly enough, and the boat's captain Dennis Davern. Wood's lifeless body was found a mile away from the boat with a small inflatable dinghy nearby. Wagner told police Wood hadn't come to bed with him, and the autopsy revealed bruises on her body and arms, along with an abrasion on her cheek. Her blood alcohol content was 0.14%, and traces of a motion sickness pill and painkiller were in her bloodstream. At first, the case was ruled as an accidental drowning by the Los Angeles County coroner, but things obviously were not that cut and dry. Captain Davern would come out telling authorities that Wood and Wagner had this intense argument that night, with Wagner allegedly preventing him from seeking help. Wood's sister also knew something was up, saying that Natalie, who couldn't swim and was also just terrified of water, would have never left the yacht by choice, especially alone. In 2012, the cause of Wood's death was amended to drowning and other undetermined factors. And finally, we have the infamous Black Dahlia case. This case revolves around the gruesome discovery of Elizabeth Short's body in Los Angeles in 1947. Elizabeth Short was a 22-year-old aspiring actress. She was found in a very disturbing state, almost completely unrecognizable. Her body was also posed in a very disturbing manner, leading to one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American criminal history. Her body, or what was left of it, had been found by a passerby. The media dubbed her the Black Dahlia, which was a reference to a popular film noir called The Blue Dahlia. The investigation revealed that Short had been last seen alive a few days earlier. They also found that the crime scene had been carefully arranged. Whoever did this was very systematic and intentional. Her body had been drained of its BOOD, and her face was slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating that unsettling Glasgow smile. It all looked like the killer had wanted to set up some demented art piece. There have been suspects and a lot of theories over the years, but never any definitive answers as to who really took Elizabeth Short's life. And with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video. His liver, portal vein, and aorta. Is that how you pronounce aorta?
I'm pretty sure.
Aorta, yeah. It's not a word that comes up very much.